The house on Wraithmoor Hill. The Jeffersons had never planned to move into the countryside, let alone into a house with a name. But when Thomas lost his job and Emily's remote art business started booming, it seemed logical to leave their cramped city apartment behind. When their real estate agent showed them the house on Wraithmoor Hill, a towering, ivy-covered Victorian estate surrounded by whispering woods, it felt too perfect to question. A dream come true, they thought. They moved in with their 2 children, 10-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Jamie, on a cloudy Saturday. The house creaked and groaned, but it had charm. Old portraits lined the staircases, and stained glass filtered golden afternoon light into mosaics on the floor. The air smelled like lavender and old books. On their first night, they toasted with sparkling juice and pizza in the grand dining room. Laughter echoed in the high ceilings. Emily noticed the fireplace spontaneously lighting on its own. She thought it must be a modern feature. The kids ran up the winding staircase giggling, eager to explore their labyrinth of rooms. At precisely 3:07 a.m., Thomas sat bolt upright in bed. He thought he heard someone crying. Faint, female sobs, long, hollow weeping, floating through the air ducts like smoke. He walked through the dim hallway and checked the children. Both were fast asleep. The sound faded before he could locate its source. The next morning, he didn't mention it. On the second night, Emily awoke to find her canvas, which she had left blank in her studio, now had a strange smear of red across it, like paint dragged by a trembling hand. She thought it was Sarah playing a prank. "Did you touch my canvas?" she asked the children at breakfast. Sarah shook her head solemnly. Jamie said nothing, but stared toward the hall like he was watching something unseen. That night, they heard footsteps above their heads while watching a movie. But all the bedrooms were on the second floor. Thomas checked again, flashlight in hand, but found nothing. By the 4th night, the house felt different. The walls seemed to breathe, the mirrors clouded over at odd times, and cold spots appeared in rooms that had no windows. Sarah, once eager to explore, refused to leave her room. "The lady in white watches me," she whispered to her mother. Emily's heart froze. "What lady?" She cries in the mirror. "And she stands near my bed." Emily laughed nervously, but the terror in her daughter's eyes silenced her. That night, she slept in Sarah's bed. At exactly 3:07 a.m., she woke to the sound of slow, dragging footsteps in the hallway. She turned and saw nothing. The next morning, they found a message scratched into the old wood of the kitchen table. "He lied. He buried me beneath the garden." Emily screamed. That was the day they met Mrs. Hedgewick, the nosy neighbor from 3 houses down who had seen the moving truck and came bearing scones and a suspicious smile. "Oh dear, you moved into that house," she said, pursing her lips. "You didn't know?" "Didn't know what?" Thomas asked. Mrs. Hedgewick leaned in. "In 1923, a woman named Eleanor Wraithmoor lived there. Her husband, Victor, was a jealous, cold man. They say he caught her trying to leave him. She vanished soon after. Rumors say he killed her, but her body was never found." The name chilled Emily's blood. "Wraithmoor," she whispered. "As in, the house." "Oh yes," the woman replied, lowering her voice. "That's why no one stayed more than a few weeks since. People say her ghost haunts the halls, looking for justice. Crying, waiting, angry." Emily and Thomas didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But by then, they were desperate. That night, the lights flickered. The walls thudded like fists beating from within. Sarah screamed in her sleep. Mirrors shattered without warning. The house felt alive and furious. Desperate, Emily turned to the one place she never thought she'd use, the dusty old library on the 3rd floor. In one of the books left behind, she found a journal, its cover cracked, the name Eleanor scribbled on the first page. It wasn't just a diary. It was a spell book. In the back were rituals, handwritten, desperate. "He has hidden me in death as he did in life. Each night, I scream, and no one hears. If you find this, bring me peace. Speak the words. Burn the sage. Offer the light." A page titled "The Binding of Grief" was marked with a dried lavender flower. Emily copied the instructions. That night, they performed the first ritual. They lit white candles, circled the mirror in salt, and burned sage while reading the incantation aloud. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the mirror quivered, and a face appeared. A woman, pale, bruised, eyes filled with infinite sadness, stared at them. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Only a silent scream. Then she vanished. Jamie, usually the quiet one, walked to the mirror and placed his small hand against it. "She's still sad," he whispered. "She says we need to help her every night, or he'll come back." "Who?" Emily asked, shaken. Jamie's eyes darkened. "The man in the basement." Thomas felt his stomach turn. "We don't have a basement." But the next morning, behind a rotting bookcase, they found a hidden door. Part 2. The Hidden Basement. Behind the old bookcase, they discovered a narrow wooden door sealed with rusted nails and dark stains that looked too much like blood. Thomas hesitated before prying it open with a crowbar. As the door creaked wide, a wave of musty air, thick with the scent of decay and mildew, rolled over them. A narrow stone staircase led downward, disappearing into darkness. "I'm going," Thomas said, grabbing a flashlight and ignoring Emily's protests. "Stay with the kids." But Jamie stepped forward. "She says you shouldn't go alone." Thomas stared at his son. "Who says?" Jamie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Eleanor." Emily's heart skipped. "No." "Thomas, wait." But he was already descending. The basement was worse than they imagined. It wasn't just old, it was unnatural. The walls were stone, but carved with strange symbols. In the center of the floor sat an iron ring, bolted into the stone like an anchor. Chains stretched from it in all directions. And in the corner, a child-sized wooden chest. He opened it. Inside were letters. Old, stained, some written in a desperate scrawl. "If I disappear, it was him. Victor watches me constantly. He says I belong to him, even in death." Thomas read them with shaking hands. Then the light flickered and died. He heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, behind him. He turned, heart hammering. Nothing. Then he saw it, etched into the stone wall, barely visible. "He is still here." Thomas ran. Upstairs, Emily clutched the children, candles burning low. As Thomas burst back into the living room, Sarah screamed. Behind him, in the hallway, a shadow passed across the wall, tall, angular. "Male." "Victor," Jamie whispered, trembling. The ritual that night was harder. The pages of Eleanor's journal seemed to shift, new words appearing where once there were none. "His hate binds me. His anger fuels the house. To free me, you must weaken him. Each night, you must banish his memory with fire, water, earth, and air. And in the 5th night, dig where he buried my truth." That night, they began with fire. They gathered the remaining letters from the chest and burned them in the fireplace as instructed. Smoke rose, thick and choking, and the air grew cold. The fire danced unnaturally, twisting into shapes that almost looked like screaming faces. Then a violent wind slammed the windows open. Glass shattered. Books flew from shelves. A voice roared from nowhere and everywhere at once. "She is mine." The room darkened. The candles blew out. Sarah collapsed. Emily screamed. And then, just as quickly as it began, the house fell silent. They found Sarah breathing, her eyes wide open, locked in a silent stare. "She's with Eleanor," Jamie said softly. They called a doctor, who found nothing wrong. "Stress," he said. "Maybe sleepwalking." But Sarah didn't wake for 2 days. In those days, Emily read every word of Eleanor's diary. She learned that Eleanor had tried to escape twice. That Victor was obsessed, not just with control, but with power. The book hinted that he had dabbled in dark rituals, believing he could tether her soul to the house forever. On the 2nd night, they used water. They filled a silver bowl with spring water, added lavender, and whispered Eleanor's name over it until the surface rippled on its own. They poured it over the stone etchings in the basement, and they hissed as if the very stone were alive. Thomas dreamed of Victor that night, of cold eyes, a cruel grin, and chains dragging behind him as he whispered, "You cannot unmake what I have done." He woke screaming. On the 3rd night, Earth. They planted a white rose bush by the front door, as instructed in the diary. As Emily dug the soil, her shovel struck something hard. Wood. They unearthed a box. Inside was a locket, and a photograph of Eleanor, beautiful, kind-eyed, with a baby in her arms. She had a child? Emily whispered, but there was no mention of a child in the journal. Only sorrow and silence. That night, they heard lullabies echoing through the house. Sarah woke at midnight. "I saw her," she whispered. "She says thank you." Hope sparked in Emily's chest. But the house grew colder still. On the fourth night, air. They opened every window, hung bells on each sill, and recited Eleanor's words from the journal, allowing the wind to carry them into the trees. At midnight, the bells rang on their own. All of them. The air turned sharp. Then, footsteps. Victor appeared in the mirror. Not just a shadow this time, but clear, pale, stern-faced, wearing a black coat stained with something dark. His eyes were empty. "You meddle in things beyond your understanding," he growled. "She chose me. She belongs here." Emily stood firm. "No, she didn't. You stole her life, and we're giving it back." His hand reached through the mirror, almost touching her cheek, then vanished in smoke. They knew what had to come next. The fifth night, the burial. The journal's final page read only, "Dig where the white roses grow. At the heart, you'll find me. Lay me to rest. Speak my name, and free us all." That morning, Thomas and Emily dug. Jamie stood nearby, holding the locket. Deeper and deeper they went, past soil, past clay, until the shovel struck bone. Emily fell to her knees. They had found her, wrapped in what remained of a silk gown, cradled in roots. Eleanor's skull rested gently in the earth, as if sleeping. Emily wept. They wrapped the remains in linen, placed the locket with her, and whispered the words from the journal one last time. Then they buried her anew, in the sunlight, beneath the blooming roses. And as the sun dipped below the trees, the house exhaled. Part 3. The Unfinished Silence. For the first time since moving in, the Jeffersons slept soundly. No footsteps, no crying, no broken mirrors, just the soft creak of an old house and the wind through the trees. By morning, sunlight poured into every room, gentle and golden. Emily brewed tea with a strange peace in her chest. Jamie played in the garden, and Sarah, smiling and alert, painted in the sunroom, using bright colors she hadn't touched in weeks. Thomas smiled for the first time in days. "Maybe it's over," he said. But Emily hesitated. "It feels too easy." That evening, Jamie came in with dirt under his fingernails and a strange look on his face. "I found something," he said, "by the rose bush." They followed him. Near the grave they had made for Eleanor was a stone marker. They hadn't noticed it before, but it had risen slightly, pushed upward by the shifting ground. Thomas brushed the dirt away. A single word carved into the stone, "Forgiven." Emily stared at it, breath-catching. "She's at peace." But then, from the house, a sound. A thud. Heavy. From the attic. Thomas looked at Emily. "We sealed the attic door." Together, they climbed the stairs. The air grew colder with every step. The attic door stood open. Inside was dust, boxes, and a cracked oval mirror leaning against the far wall. But the mirror now reflected something other than the attic. A hallway they had never seen, lined with portraits of unfamiliar faces, all twisted in expressions of grief. And in the mirror, at the end of the hallway, Victor, no longer a man, but a shape of hatred. His eyes glowing red, his mouth stitched shut. Sarah stood frozen beside the mirror, staring into it. Emily screamed and pulled her daughter away. The mirror cracked, then shattered into hundreds of pieces, and the room shook. "Why is he still here?" Thomas demanded later. "We buried her. We freed her." Emily flipped through the journal again. Between 2 pages, something dislodged, a hidden note folded into a triangle. She opened it. "I am free. But he is not. His soul is trapped by his own doing. He bound himself to this place with a curse meant for me. Now he suffers in silence. But his pain grows, and he will try to break free." Beneath that, in shaking handwriting, "Only forgiveness can destroy a curse made by hate." Emily looked at her husband. "We have to finish it." That night, they gathered the mirror shards into a circle in the garden. Sarah stood at the center holding the locket, and Jamie placed a single white rose beside her. Emily lit a candle and read aloud from the diary's final page, one that hadn't been visible before. "Victor Wraithmoor, your soul is broken by your deeds, but the one you tried to bind offers you peace. Your time is over. Return to the silence you created." The flame flickered. A sudden gust extinguished it. The night fell unnaturally still. Then, the garden bloomed. All around them, roses erupted from the soil. Ivy untwined from the house walls. The broken weather vane spun on its own, pointing east. And a shadow, darker than night, emerged from the garden soil like smoke rising into the air. "Victor." His form hovered above them, flickering like a dying fire. And then, Eleanor appeared, a soft glow in her white gown, hair loose and floating in the breeze. Her face no longer sad, but solemn. She looked at him. He looked at her. She stepped forward and lifted her hand to him. Victor recoiled at first, but she whispered, "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me." Her glow grew stronger, enveloping them both. Then, silence. When the light faded, both were gone, and the house stood utterly still. Emily wept, but this time from relief. The next day, the Jeffersons opened every window and let the air flow freely through the house. Light reached corners it never had before. The cold spots vanished. Even the basement, when opened again, was just stone and dust. No chains, no markings. They invited Mrs. Hedgewick for tea. "Oh my," she gasped, stepping in. "It feels warm, alive." Emily smiled. "It is." But the story wasn't quite over. That night, Jamie asked if he could keep the locket. Emily nodded. He opened it. Inside, where once there had only been a faded photo, was now a small, shining key. Part 4, the final door. The small key hidden in Eleanor's locket was ornate, gold, with strange vines and stars etched along the stem. It didn't look like any house key Thomas had ever seen. "Where did that come from?" he asked. Jamie shrugged. "It was just there." They searched the house again, looking for a lock it might belong to. But every door, every drawer, every trunk had a different key. Nothing matched. Until Sarah spoke. "It's not for this house," she said. "It's for what's beneath it." The children led them back to the basement. The air was no longer heavy, but there was still something unfinished. Emily felt it in her chest, a tugging, like an unanswered question. They returned to the stone floor, now quiet and still. Thomas ran his fingers along the walls, until he found it, a hollow click behind a brick. He pressed it. The wall shifted. A section of stone rotated inward like a secret door. Behind it, darkness. Flashlight in hand, Thomas stepped inside. It was a small chamber, no more than 10 feet across. Dust coated everything. In the center stood a pedestal with a brass lock, the keyhole shaped like a rosebud. Emily stepped forward, heart pounding. She inserted the golden key. Click. The pedestal opened. Inside was a book. Old, thick, bound in soft black leather. On the cover, Wraithmoor, the family name. They took it upstairs and read late into the night. It was a family grimoire, a collection of spells, curses, history, and secrets passed down through generations of the Wraithmoor bloodline. Victor had not just been cruel. He had been part of a long, dark legacy. The house, it turned out, was a prison, built to contain spirits, created by the original Wraithmoor patriarchs who had experimented with binding souls to objects and places. Victor's attempt to bind Eleanor was not a desperate act. It was part of a centuries-old ritual meant to trap her essence forever. But something had gone wrong. Eleanor's will had been too strong, her pain too deep. Instead of binding her, the ritual had bound him as well. And now, the book warned, the energy left behind was unstable. If the remaining fragments of the Wraithmoor binding magic were not destroyed, the cycle could begin again, with someone else's soul. Emily looked at her children, horrified. That night, she dreamed of the house burning, of her children crying behind glass walls, of Victor laughing. She woke shaking. "We have to end it," she whispered. The last section of the book was a ritual called the Severing, a final act to cleanse a place of ancestral magic. But it came with a warning. Once done, the link is broken. The house will never be the same. Its history will be erased. Its magic gone. Forever. Thomas hesitated. "If we do this, we lose it all." Emily looked around at the home she had grown to love. "No," she said. "We keep our family. That's all that matters." The next night, they prepared. The ritual required 4 offerings, one from each element, placed in the 4 corners of the house. Fire, a burning candle made from wax Eleanor had once melted. Water, a bowl of spring water blessed with Eleanor's final words. Earth, soil from her grave beneath the rose bush. Air, a feather found in the attic the night the mirror shattered. And one final component, the book itself, to be placed in the heart of the house, the fireplace. At midnight, they began. Sarah placed the earth in the west. Jamie placed the water in the east. Thomas set the feather in the north. Emily, holding the candle, went south. They lit it. And as the flame flickered to life, the house breathed in, walls groaning, windows rattling, the air shimmering. They met at the fireplace. Emily opened the book one last time. The pages fluttered as if caught in a storm, though the room was still. She kissed her children, then tossed the book into the flames. The fire roared. Suddenly, the walls began to glow faintly, the very air humming with power. A wind blew through the house, not violent, but final. Portraits melted into blank canvases. Old furniture cracked and crumbled into dust. The mirror shards outside disintegrated into fine sand. From every corner of the house, voices whispered. And then silence. The fire dimmed. The house stood whole, but different. The magic was gone. Part 5. A New Beginning. The morning after the ritual, the Jeffersons awoke to something they hadn't felt since the day they moved in. Peace. True, bone-deep peace. The house no longer creaked at odd hours. The walls no longer whispered. Even the scent of lavender, once ever-present, had faded. The fireplace, once a gate between worlds, was now just bricks and ash. Outside, the rose bush bloomed brighter than ever. Sarah ran barefoot in the garden. Jamie followed her, giggling, chasing butterflies. Thomas stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the wind move through the trees like a friend. Emily wandered room to room in the house, half expecting something to stir. But nothing did. Eleanor was gone. Victor was gone. The curse, broken. They stayed in the house for the rest of the summer. Slowly, it began to feel like theirs, truly theirs. They painted the walls, brought in bright new furniture, replaced the broken mirrors with artwork Sarah painted. And in the library, where Eleanor's journal had once been, they created a family shelf. On it, they placed the remaining photograph of Eleanor and her child, the locket, and a simple note. Your story mattered. We remember you. One day, in early autumn, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, old-fashioned paper. Inside was a single sentence written in elegant script. Thank you. E. Emily smiled and tucked it into the locket. Years passed. The Jeffersons grew older, the children taller. They told no one about the full story, not the neighbors, not their friends. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Sarah would look toward the garden and say, she's still watching. But only to make sure we're okay. And they were. The house on Wraithmoor Hill became known for its warmth, its laughter, its garden of white roses that bloomed even in the coldest winters. They never spoke of the basement again. And the hidden chamber behind the stone wall, they bricked it up. Together. Because some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But the legacy wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It wasn't even ghosts. It was the power of forgiveness. The courage to face the past. And the choice to build a better future.